Well, hello, hello. How's it going, you guys? I'm so glad you found your way to the sketch session, and I'm so glad we get to draw together tonight, and I'm especially glad because tonight is animal night, and it's a woodland animal or woodland creature that we get to draw, so that is always a win in my book. What I wanted to say is that we have a very particular lesson today, and that is that we're going to be focusing on foxes. And in particular, the reason why I chose foxes is because they have this gorgeous fur. And I wanted to do a lesson on how to capture fur without losing the underlying structure, because it is so easy for all of us artists who are attracted to drawing animals that have this beautiful coat to maybe we get a sense of that beautiful fur in our drawing, but it also starts to look mushy and like it's just losing the underlying structure. And so that's what we'll talk about tonight, and I hope you're ready for that. If you've never been here and you're catching the recording and you just kind of saw the title and you're like, oh yeah, I need to draw fur, let me explain to you how these sessions work so you can get the most out of it. First of all, my name is Carolyn. I'm the owner of Kira Studios, and that's where I teach classical drawing skills so artists can develop a really solid footing to explore their creative voice from. And every Thursday we meet here for an hour and we do these sketch sessions. And so what I want you to understand is these are not an hour of me drawing a beautiful drawing. It's designed so we can draw together. And the way I design them in particular is that we have multiple images to draw from. We begin with very brief poses, just 1 minute, 2 minute, and then we incrementally make those poses longer and longer. And we always have a focus, a specific topic, like today, the fur topic. And like that, I'm offering you a way to get away from the pressure of having to produce frameable art all the time. Because if we put that pressure on our practice, we never grow, because we're always afraid to fall on our faces and create crappy art. And so we stay within our lane and we don't really practice and grow our skills. So the sketch sessions here, they are my offer to you to let loose, try out new things, try out hard things, fail, fall on your face together with me, because I'll be falling right alongside with you. But having done so over and over in brief increments will make us make better choices sooner. And so that is my idea behind these sketch sessions, and I hope you're on board for that. And if you are, put this on a big screen, because the reference image will be side by side with my drawing board, and the bigger your reference, the easier of a drawing time you'll have. And of course you want to draw along and not just sit back and watch, because you'll learn much more if you're drawing. So I'm seeing Ted's in the house, Chris is in the house. Awesome, so glad to hear it. Oh, hey, Catherine. Oh my God, so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. And we get to draw animals together, even better. Okay, so let me jump into the lesson. I always talk a little bit up front, and then I switch the camera to the overhead camera, and we actually draw together. So when we want to draw fur, or an animal that has lots of fur, lots of shiny, luscious fur, the tendency is this. We get attracted by this animal because of the fur. And so we want to get to the fur really, really soon. And we think it defines the animal. But in fact, we want to wait until the very end of the drawing to actually imply the fur. So that's the first point I want you to keep in mind throughout the evening. Wait, bide your time. It's the last step of the drawing. Now, what do we do in the beginning? What do we spend the first few minutes, seconds of our drawing on? The underlying structure. And I made a little chart. So when I switch the cameras, I'll show you that chart for a fox. But what you want to do is, whatever you're drawing, whether it's a person, an animal, whatever animal it is, you want to segment out the individual forms. So on a person, it would be, okay, head, neck, rib cage, abdomen, pelvis, etc. And we want to do exactly the same for animals. And as you do so, you don't just want to name them, as in like head and neck, but you want to ascribe a simplified form to them, at least mentally. Okay, this head is egg-like on a person. This head is spherical. on a cat, for example. And then the neck, is the neck perfect cylinder, or is it more wedge-like? So you see, you go segment by segment, ascribing simplified forms. And as I said, I'll show you what I did for the fox in just a minute. Once you have that, you draw that, and you don't have to spell it out with like perspective rules and like make it all technical, but you want to have it implied in your drawing. And when you have it, then you can start to imply your furry texture. Now, where do you do that? Our tendency is that we just kind of put furry marks all over the place, and we hope that something will stick and it'll look like fur. It's like drawing spaghetti lines when you want to imply hair on a person, but it doesn't work out that way. The way it works out is that you imply fur on the edges of the forms and the edges of shadow shapes, the contours, but not so much on the inside of your shapes. And when you do so, look for clumps and see if you can find a certain pattern and make it irregular so it's not all repetitive and all the same. All right, so I think those are the main points I wanted to say before we switch the camera. So let me do that real quick. Drawings and screen. Let me push this up here, and this time I'm going to transition so we can actually see. Okay, so for the fox, let's go through segment by segment how I in my head separate out the individual elements. Foxes have a very rounded cranium, so I'm going with a sphere. But they have a really long snout, and that snout, like you can see different vantage points. So here he's looking at us, here is the side view. That snout is actually longer than what I drew here, and that's very characteristic. So it's almost like you have this long truncated cone attached to this sphere. Then the neck is kind of like a truncated cone, again, narrower here, wider here. Then that attaches to the shoulder girdle. And you can tell, like here, I made it more narrow on top and more boxy looking. Here it's more rounded. So, you know, these forms, they don't have to be perfect. There is no one way of doing this, you know. You just come up with a simplified form that seems to capture to you what's happening underneath. And if you're having a hard time with this, you look up one of those animal drawing books. Joe Weatherly has a beautiful one, but there's a different one that I, of course, can't think of the name right now. I'll put it in the comments later on. So, and they have these segmentations already figured out for you, and you just practice them. Here we have the rib cage, again, cylindrical. On these foxes in particular, they're actually wider on top, and then they narrow down towards the sternum here. And then for the pelvis back here, because it kind of merges with the haunches, I just made up a little narrow box. And now I have my individual segments. And I'm going to, throughout the drawing, refer back to these segments over and over again. I might not draw them as heavy-handed as I have right here, but you'll see me stack them in front of each other. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you. And here I also included this here is an even more simplified version: head, rib cage, pelvis, just using ovoids for that. You see what works for you, but you do want to have these individual building blocks in mind as you dive in. So the first poses will be 2 1s. So that's just for warming up. And then we'll increase to 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and the last one will be a 20-minute. And it's always written on the slide itself how long we have per image. So in the first ones, I'm not even worried about fur. The first ones are just to get us started. This is when we turn on our drawing brain, you know, especially if you've been doing like very logical things all day long, you've been problem solving all day long, and all of a sudden you're grabbing a pencil for the first time in the day, and it might take you a while to get into the drawing mode. And that's okay, and that's why we have these warm-up gestures. And if you've been drawing all day long or painting all day long, and you're already in your art brain, then you can use these as a way to capture rhythms and motion, and just practice that for a little while. So when I do these gestural warm-ups, the goal is to strip out the particulars. The goal is just to see the big rhythms, the big shapes. See if you can visually connect them into a fluid looking, unified entirety. Rather than getting lost in the bits and pieces. Okay, so this here is 2 minutes now, so you have a little bit longer for this one, but again, just still falling into our mark making rhythm. And so with a gesture, when I say it's not about the details, it's about connecting the individual bits and pieces. The way you have to do that is you have to look in a way where you can see the whole piece, meaning the whole fox, the whole human. If you're scanning, like if your eyes are just scanning down the figure, body part by body part, it's going to make it difficult to capture a gesture that feels like it's fluid and whole. And so when we draw these short gestures, you know, we don't have a lot of time. And as I said in the intro, it's not because I want to stress you out. To the contrary, I want to take the stress away. Like, these don't have to look good. Like, yes, you can see mine. I wish you couldn't, but you know, that's the whole point. Like, I want you to see what it is like to just warm up. Like, we don't spring from the womb perfect, and the same is true with most artists when we get started. It's just, you know, it's a little bit rough in the beginning, and that's totally fine. So I'm looking how the left side here visually connects with the back. And then I see how that swoops into the tail. So you see now we have these very energetic rhythms that make for a smooth looking gesture. Can't really tell yet that it's a fox, but that's for the gesture. I'm more interested in the pose, not so much at what it is. Like, what's the energy? What's the positioning? That's what I'm interested in for the gesture. And then once I have that, I look for some characteristic particular. So like if I was drawing a person, I'd maybe look for, okay, where's the eye socket? Where's the ear? Right. Another 2-minute one. Let me switch to a different pencil real quick. So in a pose like this, I really like to think about the forms already because they help me get that sense of perspective. And I know you're probably drawing, or hopefully you're drawing alongside with me, but can we just like agree that foxes are just awesome? if you want to put in the chat later on how much you appreciate foxes or whether you kind of think they're overrated, I want to hear about that. Okay, so here I got the body, let's get the head. So with gestures, and this is for me the hardest part about the whole like drawing in front of people rather than just in my own unobserved studio walls, you want to draw with chutzpah. You want to draw like you mean it, and you want to make like marks that have conviction. And as you do so, you risk falling flat on your face. Like you risk like pushing down too hard and in completely the wrong place. And but rather that than having a timid, scratchy little gesture that is just like this little whisper and it barely gets the point across. So I'd rather just eat it in front of you and embarrass myself than having like a little awkward gesture that can make up its mind. Okay, so I think this one is the last 2-minute one before we get into a 5-minute one. So again, I'm looking for the visual connection. Okay, Trish, I'm glad you're on the same page as I am. I don't know if I said it earlier. I think I did, that like anytime you put a woodland creature in front of me, like that just makes me giddy and happy and my day is made. So I did a poll on Instagram, what animals to draw, and Bill suggested foxes, and they'd been on my mind anyways. And the other animals that got suggested were too similar to the deer we drew last time. So I was thrilled we could do foxes today. And my parents, so most of you know I'm from Germany and my folks, they live in Germany. And I'm so jealous because my dad told me that they have a fox coming by their place. So they live at the edge of town. There's a forest behind them. And so they have a fox coming around and, you know, he takes care of the fox. He puts out like the chicken carcass and whatnot for them to come and pick up. So I'm super jealous, but I told him he should set up with a camera and take some pictures. Okay, so here's our first longer one. So here I'll be more methodical. So first of all, nothing changes. I'm beginning with a gesture. And so on the screen, this looks very light, probably because I'm not putting a lot of pressure on. I'm just finding, okay, what's the overall curvature of the pose? And the tendency is to only draw what you see. Like you see this tail segment here and the butt, and then you don't really know what's going on with the shoulders. So when you're really drawing, you're not just copying. We don't do that, right? So we start to think about the segments and where they are, and you don't have to draw them out super elaborately. At least you want to make little notes to yourself. Okay, this is where the shoulders would end. So shoulder blades are oriented this way. This is where the upper arm bone would be, and then here comes the lower arm bone. If you're interested in more like what's the skeletal structure like, we did a sketch session a couple months ago on cat skeletons, and foxes and dogs, they're very similar in their skeleton to cats. The head shape changes. So if that's something you're interested in, look for that live stream. So here's the rib cage, and we have the spine curving that way, and then we have here the haunches. So right now on the screen, this just looks like a bunch of spheres, right? But I'm in my head clarifying to myself what it is that I'm looking at, and now I can add more details, including the fur structure whenever I get to it, and know that I'm implying the fur in the right spots. Because what you want to think about is where the parts kind of rub against each other, that's where the fur will kind of push out. So that's why we want to know about where the forms end. So remember how earlier on I said we have this kind of cone-like snout, long cone-like snout that attaches to a sphere. You see right here, that is where that cone is attaching to the sphere, and that's where you can already start indicating some of that fur. That's where they have these, I don't even know how to describe it, like these cheek tufts that are so fox-like. And then you see here also where the neck starts to meet the shoulders. So if we don't think about the underlying forms, we wouldn't notice it, right? But now we can tell, okay, right here is what we can use to imply the fur, rather than having a million little individual lines right there. And then here, that would be where the shoulder blades are sitting. So this is the shoulder area, right? So here the shoulder blades, they're kind of sticking out usually. So you see that bump on the upper contour. So that's another place to indicate the fur texture. So as you can see, we don't need the fur indication everywhere, just in some key places. And here I got a little bit stretched out proportionally, but that's all right. And so when you see, like I'm implying some texture here on this edge, I'm applying it on this edge. When you do imply this texture, you want to create a shorthand. meaning a stand-in, because especially only have 7 minutes, there's not a lot of time to get it all right and all perfect. So you just want to find a way of making marks that are furry, that just kind of speak to what it's like there. And here, what I'm doing right here, I'm implying the fur on the shadow edge. So I said implied on contour edges, form edges, and here, this is where the light is hitting, and then the butt's rolling into shadow, and wherever that kind of shadow edge is, that's where I'm implying some more fur. So texture is all about edges. So as you can tell, I didn't begin with the fur. I built up to it. Okay, let's scoot this over. Okay, 10 minutes for this one, a little bit longer. So let's get the gesture first. So if I connect visually the neck with the rib cage, this is kind of the arc I'm getting here. Here's the counter rhythm on top. So chest to belly, back into tail. And then they have these beautiful long legs. And depending on what kind of fox you're looking at, they might be even longer. So I'm looking at how the paws align. So quadrupeds, it's really useful to know a little bit of perspective, like how a rectangle will look in perspective, because the way their footprints will touch the ground, it will align on a rectangle in perspective. So you can kind of double check if your foot placement is in the realm of possibility. Or if you need to adjust it. Okay, so got the gesture. Let me just get that tail. I got a little bit long back here. Now I'm gonna go through my segments, and I have 10 minutes, just a little bit longer, so I can go a little bit slower. So I have the head, and the head attaches to somewhat short cylinder. I'm trying to keep this erasable, so all of this is very faint. Then we have this broader at the bottom, narrowing at the top shoulder girdle. And then that attaches to the rib cage, which is also cylindrical. I said earlier, it's a little bit wider on top and narrows towards the breastbone. But again, with a 10-minute drawing, like being precise is not that important. What's important is that you, in your mind, get clear on what the segments are and how they overlap each other. And here we have the hips. So it's right side of the hip, left side, and they kind of slant down. I'm making this box out of it. And then even the tail, even though the tail structurally, like if you take all the fur off, there's, you know, only these tiny little hose-like thing left, but the tail is bushy enough so you can think about it as having like a cylindrical structure to it. Okay, for the snout, I'm going to get that attached. So you always want to look at whether it's a human nose or an animal nose. You want to look at how does that, so for human nose it would be a wedge. This here is a cylinder. How does the tip of the cylinder relate to the sphere that it's attaching to? Like, is that tip of the nose sticking out beyond the edge of the sphere, or is it inside of the edge of the sphere? So I can bring this down even more. So it's still pretty loose. You know, I wasn't like all obsessive about the structure. It looks a little funny right now, right? But it's just a stand-in. It's just to get my structure set up. And now I can get to the fun parts. And I recommend you always start with an area that intrigues you and where you feel like you got a shot at getting it right. So I know that there is the philosophy of like get the hard parts done first, but I don't recommend that for drawing. I recommend getting to the hard parts and not shying away from them, but I recommend starting with an area where you feel like you know what's going on and you have an idea of how to go about it. And then once you got your confidence up and you feel like, okay, I got this, I can hang in there, then you can start moving towards the more challenging pieces, challenging aspects. I'm gonna go like that. So I'm getting some more specific shapes. And then I'm starting to indicate again the furry texture at the edges. So here on the inside of the ears, that's very characteristic of the fox. And you see how it kind of clumps together. And then this kind of very light orange color that you see, that is right at the edge of neck attaching to the shoulder area. And so here again, we can use the fur coming off the cheeks. Make sure that this here overlaps the fur along the neck. Again, I'm not drawing a million individual hairs, just getting that shorthand going. And see how this arc here of little fur overlaps now the rib cage, and not the rib cage, the shoulder and chest. So this will be the chest rather than the shoulders. But it belongs to the same form. So with fur, especially if it's longer fur, notice if there's a direction to it. So you see how here they curve this way. Here they kind of curve down this way. So pay attention to that. That's something nice. And then a secondary thing that might be worth your while is to notice patches of fur that aren't structural. I think later on we'll have a pretty shaggy looking fox in the mix, and I'll kind of come back to that idea. So that's where it can indicate like, oh, here they have like a shock of extra thick fur, a clump of extra thick fur. It's not because there's a form beginning or ending there. It's just, you know, it's where nature endowed them with an extra patch. And that can be indicated as well in your drawing. So as I said in the intro, these are not supposed to be finished drawings, right? They're just practice drawings or throwaway drawings, essentially. If you fall in love with one of the poses, you can always come back later and keep drawing on the same drawing, or you can start a new one. But again, the goal is not to produce a beautiful fox drawing tonight. It's to strengthen your understanding of how you can draw fur. It's a difference. And sometimes you can do both at the same time, but I really like taking the pressure off. And I've said this a million times, so it's just like at the gym, you know, you don't take your grandparents to the gym so you can show them how many push-ups you can do. It's like, no, you do it just so you can stay strong. Okay, another 10 minutes. So here we just are zoomed in on the head so we can see everything on a slightly larger scale. But it's the same principle. Gesture, just swoop, long nose. Everything in life has a gesture. Gesture is not just for figures. It's just how things are arranged and how things visually connect with each other. That's what the gesture does. Okay, so I got my gesture, so now I'm thinking about the forms. So as I said, we have this long cone-like snout that attaches to a ball, right? And you want to remember what it would be like to snap some rubber bands around that ball, because it'll help us later on. See this one right here? It'll help us attach the ears in a way where they feel like they're grounded well on that head form. And the same goes with this kind of rubber band. Snap this way. We'll align our eyes on that circumference. Hey Isabella, good to see you virtually. I hope you're drawing along with us. Okay, so here and again, what I did here, I'm doing much lighter over here because I want it to be erasable, but I'm still putting it in. This is the underdrawing. Okay, let's think about the neck. So I'm going to draw that out a little bit more clearly. Over here. So this is what I do in my mind, and often literally on the side of the page. I deconstruct things. Cone, sphere, truncated cone. And I'm thinking about, okay, how does this part attach to this part? And I kind of visualize that. So this is what I was ghosting in over here. And the more you do it, the more feedback you get about how you're doing on practicing this, the easier it'll get. Okay, so now I have that. I'll make sure I got the ears aligned with my vertical wrapping line here. Again, here, so this arc that I'm drawing right here, it's how that ear would attach to the head if I could see through it, right? Okay. Other ear. Alrighty. Okay, so now I feel good enough about beginning with some fun parts. So I was being patient, I did what I said I should be doing, and now I can start indicating fur and capture details like the eyes without feeling guilty because I didn't eat my artist vegetables. And so especially when you have an animal where you have a combination between thick, shaggy fur and slicker areas. You see how on the nasal bone area, the fur is very short. And then we get these beautiful tufts over here. You want to play the difference up between, look at this smooth contour and look at the texture over here. And again, we create a shorthand. In those areas where we do imply the texture. And as you're developing this shorthand, just always keep an eye on it not becoming too repetitive. You want to keep it irregular. We want to find clumps. Find clumps, and we want to look at the direction the fur is growing in. So a lot of this construction work that I was doing, I can erase that out as I draw. I often don't care. I just leave it in because I know it's just a practice drawing. As I said, we're not creating art. But if you do decide you want to come back to this, take it to the next level, then you would erase out your underdrawing, of course, unless it's your stylistic thing that you do. Okay, so right now I'm implying the fur again on the edges of that patch right now. So this is that cheek patch that's so characteristic of foxes. So I'm finding, first of all, the big shape for that patch. So see, it's like a almost like a flame shape, brought here, narrow towards the tip. And then along the edges of that shape, do I imply that this is fur, or along the edges of where that patch is coming out of. And so here, along the muzzle, has this super fine little hair. So I'm gonna want to draw those differently from the longer hair back here. And the more of a fine point you have on your pencil, the easier that will work out for you. Okay, so even here, so what I just drew, I drew the eye, I drew the eye socket. So this little top line here is the rim of the eye socket. And so that is another form. And what I said earlier is that we always indicate the fur along the forms, the edges of the forms. So you haven't seen me do a lot of tonal rendering yet because it's not necessary, especially, you know, these are quick sketches. So if you think of drawing, or if you understand drawing as copying, then that's usually what we default to. We just kind of try and render the variations of lightness and darkness, and then kind of wonder, oh man, why didn't it work out? And it's because we forgot about the underlying structure. Okay, so this is our last one for the evening already. That went really fast, but it's a long one, so we'll have a lot of time for it. It's gonna be the closest one to actually being a finished drawing, for whatever that means, for what that's worth. Let me see if I can make the window a little bit bigger of the fox so you can see him. Ah, there we go, much better. So again, this is 20 minutes. Let me scoot it like this, so you know. And I'll click off of here, so this goes away. All right. Step 1, who can guess? It's the gesture. And here we have this beautiful foreshortened pose. You're welcome. It's like a double whammy. You get to practice foreshortening and furry texture. And that's just how it is, right? It all gets leveled at us at the same time with drawing. And this one is tricky though, because the photograph, it's very light. There's a lot of light in this picture. And so some of the, like this area is hard to see. So that's always the excuse I hear. I don't mean it like in a, like, oh, those terrible students, but like in the classroom, I often hear, well, I can't see it, or I don't understand, like I can't see what's going on there. And so that's why, you know, I can't draw it. And that's the whole point I keep trying to make every week, is because if we just copy what we see, we're always going to be limited by the reference, the model, and that's why that's just not the best way of going about drawing. Instead, we want to construct. And what I mean by that is we want to understand that the head is a sphere, which is attached to a cone-like neck. And this cone-like neck is attached to the strangely shaped chest shoulder segment. And I'm actually going to draw that one out. Then we have the rib cage. And so here's the thing. If you don't understand much about foreshortening, you're like, what the hell? I don't even know what I'm looking at here. And you get all freaked out about it. Let me explain. If you see the fox from the side, the torso will look long, with the hips being here and the tail being here. And the rib cage is kind of egg-like, right? So when we see an egg, so let me see how I can illustrate that. Let's just use my pencil. If you see something long, like let's say this is a long egg here, from the side, you see its full length. If it comes at you, it visually foreshortens. See how much shorter this pencil looks now as compared to this? Here I see the whole length. Now all of a sudden, I only see the tip of it. And that is what happens with this egg shape. We don't see the full length anymore. It's going to turn, and we're only going to see, you know, more like a circular shape. So this circle is being overlapped by this shoulder area. And then we have the hips back here. You can think of them as a boxy thing. And only once I have that do I allow myself to go further. And you know, if you're coming in just now on this drawing, it just looks like a mess of tangled lines. It's building box behind cylinder, behind chest area, neck, head. And as long as in your head you're clear about which lines belong to which forms, then you're good. This is not something you'd be showing to anybody in the middle of the process. Always pay attention to how the feet align. Which one is the lower foot, by how much so. Maybe you can align them with an angle. Okay, and now we can get into the fun parts and not feel guilty about it. So this here, this line that I'm drawing belongs to the part where that cone-like nose structure is inserting or attaching to the ball-like head. So I don't see that on the photo, but I know that that's where the form change is happening. And that will be important later when I start indicating the fur. I'm going to erase a little bit of my underdrawing just so I can see my final lines a little bit more clearly without them being obstructed. So again, I indicate the fur at the edge of the form. So my form is my ball-like head. At the edge, whether it's the outer edge or an inner plane change. That's why I indicate that. I want to look for the direction it's growing in. I want to see if I can make clumps. I'm going to create a little shorthand, like a stand-in that implies this is the sort of texture we're dealing with. So here, this is the underside of the jaw, underside of the chin, mouth. So anytime you see the color change, anytime you see the form change, that's where you can place your fur. Anytime you see a shadow edge like here. I think I made his head way too big, so this drawing might have to grow. Again, keep it irregular. Seek out opportunities to play slicker, non-furry edges against the scruffier edges that do have a lot of fur present. Okay, so we see also that color change between the white chest and the more orange neck. So that's a perfect place to grab that fur texture. The direction. See, this will have to get longer, the legs. So right here, so see, this is my shoulder box. At the back of the shoulder box, that's where I'm going to imply the fur again. Just lightly. Because if I don't put that line in with fur on it, that's what will make it look like just a big, mushy fur ball instead of something that has structure. And then here, see this kind of ghosted in mark? That's where the neck would attach to my chest shoulder box. So again, I'm going to imply a little bit of fur there along that attachment. So if I just draw what I see, I might just randomly place some little fur marks. But if I place those little fur marks exactly where the forms connect to each other, then you have structure in your drawing. And you do want to pay attention, I said this earlier too, to the different types of fur. So earlier we had this zoomed in portrait where you could see the tiny little hairs around the muzzle as compared to the really long shaggy hair along the neck. So you want to treat those differently. If you treat them the same, it's not going to be clear in your drawing. what's going on. So again, here the leg is coming out of that shoulder chest area. So that's where I'm going to indicate some hair tufts, again, because it's a form change. I'll start cleaning up a little bit of that smudginess. Get to the back part. Let's see how much time we have left on this. Okay, like 5 more minutes. Okay, so now a little bit of fur at the back edge of the belly. And so here's a little bonus lesson that hopefully most of you are already familiar with. As things go further away from you, you want to make them lighter. It's called atmospheric perspective. And like that, you can kind of underline, emphasize if something is going in space or into space. So whatever is closer to you gets darker lines, more accented lines. Whatever is further away, even if it's just a small distance, it's just relative on your page. You make that lighter. And lighter can mean you break a line. Like you don't have your contour fully connected all the way. So the tail is kind of hidden back there. And then here we see that last back foot. Checking how these 2 feet align with each other. This one is higher, that one is lower. So for that tail and that back left leg, I'm just putting a little coat of shading on. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good to me, and I'll futz around with the face a little bit more. I feel like that's pretty clunky and awkward, but luckily that wasn't the lesson today, but still coming back to that. So if you have questions, something came up while you were drawing, you're wondering about it, put them into the comments now because there's always a little bit of lag and I don't want to sign off and miss any of your questions. So if you do have one, put them in now. I'm happy to answer it. You can also make suggestions for any of the upcoming sessions. If there's a particular animal you want to draw. Next week we'll be doing inanimate things. So we always cycle through figure, portrait, animals, and then inanimate things. Chris and I, we've been considering doing some wave drawings. So if anybody's interested in drawing some waves, let me know. You can get on that. Okay, that was it. Well, I got to refine the left side a little bit, so I'll probably keep drawing on it a little bit later after the stream. So let me transition and wrap up the lesson for you. Well, I hope you had a good time. I hope you made a mess of things. I hope you tried things out and you learned something by trying those new ideas. I want to wrap up the lesson by just reviewing everything. So just so you have it in your mind as you're leaving your sketch pad, and so you really solidified your lesson. Point number one, even though the fur might be the thing that's drawing you in to make a drawing of the animal, you want to leave it to the very end to actually imply the fur. So instead, you want to build the underlying structure. And to do so well, you want to go body part by body part. First of all, name them, and then at least in your mind, but preferably on a side piece of paper, convert them to a simple form. So for the fox, we had a ball for the head, a cone for the nose, a cylinder for the neck. And then you also want to be aware of how those forms attach to each other. Like if you lifted them apart from each other, where would be the surface that, like if you had to glue them together, where would you put the glue to put them together? Because those are ideally the things that you'll draw in your underdrawing. And I know it's not easy, but it's so worth it because you don't just want to copy, we want to construct, right? And that will set you apart from anybody who isn't trained. So once you've understood your individual forms, you draw them on the page, and then you can get into indicating fur. And as we have learned, you do so by indicating fur on the edges, whether it's the outer contour, whether it's an inner plane change, like where the forehead meets the length of the nose, like that would be a plane change, right? That's a great place to indicate furry textures. Or it could be a shadow edge, right? So those are your three places to indicate the fur. And when you do so, you want to create a shorthand for the fur, meaning like a little way of making marks that implies the fur without having you sit there and draw individual hairs. As you create that shorthand, look for clumps, keep them irregular, try not to be too repetitive. See how you can make them look different from each other. And the last point, let me see if I had anything else. Well, I guess the last point was to not draw individual hairs unless you have 30 hours for your drawing. So I hope this was helpful. I want to see your drawings if you're bold enough to share them. If you're on Instagram, you can tag me at Kira Studios and I'll give you a virtual high five for drawing along and being awesome and doing the hard work. And next week we'll be back, as I said, for inanimate things. And if you found this and you drew along and you like my teaching style, make sure you're on my email list because you get really fun stories. You'll get motivation to keep you on track. And you don't want to miss anything that I only send to my insiders over there. And the link for that is in the description box below. So, okay, you guys, I'll see you next time. Take care and happy drawing to you.